Our next speaker is me. I wanted to talk about the transmutation of the metals, and I want you to take it personally, because we're going to be talking about these things as archetypal powers as well as in the labs and as well as in nature. And one way the alchemists portrayed the archetypal powers of the metals was with dragons. In fact, dragons are the only animals in alchemy, the only symbols in alchemy that occur in all through the stages and operations of alchemy on every level. Dragons are the archetypal energies. They're always energies, they're always powers, but they're expressions of energies that can be felt psychologically, can be seen in the lab, in the way metals react and compounds react. It's in their behavior, it's in their energy. We're going to go through this in kind of an organized fashion, believe it or not. This is the Azov drawing, A to Z, the transformations, alpha to omega. It's a nice summary of the whole work, and I use it a lot in the teachings because it kind of organizes things. But here we have the 7 stages of transformation, the 7 operations, and each has a symbol of a metal and the planet, of course. Because in alchemy, the metals on the planet are the most direct and pure physical expressions of the planetary energies. In fact, the alchemists believe that the metals were exhalations from the planets that actually traveled through space and were engendered here on Earth. And maybe they were. And the symbols of the metals and the planets form a transmutation pattern here on this drawing. This is your meditation mandala, where you focus your attention at the center of the drawing. The center here is the alchemist. A lot of times people put mirrors here for the meditation. This triangular symbol is a symbol of water or grace, divine grace coming down. And it means subtly that the alchemist and the divine principle, the alchemist and God are one. That is the goal of alchemy. And it means, too, that they got in a lot of trouble with the church over this type of meditation. But basically, these are the 3 principles of mercury, sulfur, and salt, or soul, spirit, and body. And, of course, the dichotomy between the feminine and masculine forces in the metals and nature and in our psychologies are here. So there's a lot of symbols here. There's the elements of fire, air, earth, and water. It's all incorporated in this drawing, which is meant as a meditation. We're going to start with Saturn, lead at this point, the black, number 1 step. You see this square for salt, meaning that this is where the original salt of creation comes from, both in our personalities and in nature. This metal, this lead, comes from the planet Saturn. Saturn is the farthest out planet. It's the boundary planet between our cozy solar system and the rest of the galaxy. So the alchemists really didn't pay much attention to the planets beyond that. They were like super physical properties like Uranus and Pluto. They had a distant influence on us over a long period of time, but the inner planets had a direct influence on our lives, and those are the planets that would consume their attention in transmutation. Saturn, of course, is a huge planet. Saturn, the personality of Saturn is one of time, distance. It takes 33 years to go around the sun. It desires matter, let's put it that way. Saturn is the principle of creation. In fact, the rings of Saturn are about pulling in matter to me. Bring me into being. In fact, if Saturn could have accumulated enough matter, and it was very close to doing it, it would have become a star, so that we would have had 2 suns in our solar system. And it would have split into God knows what, but the actual secret or Hermetic teachings say that our journey is in towards our sun and back towards Saturn to make it a sun, to fulfill the promise of Saturn in our galaxy, in our solar system, in ourselves, is to take that lead and turn it into gold. And the lead itself carries all these signatures I just discussed. Lead itself is an ugly metal. And there's something important here. The relationship between Saturn and silver is extremely important to understand. And by understanding that, you get to understand the great potential of lead, and also why the alchemists treat it with so much respect and devotion. Lead, if you cut a piece of lead, this is natural lead, which forms these little square crystals in fact, almost all the ores or the natural states of lead are square, meaning coming into being, the cubic stone, if you will. The cubic stone, in a lot of ways, is considered by alchemists in metallurgy to be lead. If you cut a piece of lead, dull gray lead, it looks like beautiful silver. It's real shiny for a few seconds, 3 minutes maybe, until it just turns dead before your eyes. It darkens, turns gray, takes on this oxidation layer. So lead dies easily, and lead and Saturn are both archetypes of death. That darkness is the darkest darkness. In death, there is no consciousness. Silver, the darkness of silver, however, is darkness in the light. Silver is a reflection of light. It has no light of its own like the moon. But silver is very much sensitive to light and reacts with light and has a relationship with light. But all the darkness of silver is in the light. In other words, silver is the unconscious part of our minds. It's in the light, but it's still in the shadows. We're not conscious. It's like the reflection of the sun or the reflection of the solar power of mind. Whereas lead is dead. Lead is nothing. And the process of dying is very important in alchemy. And the process of that in our psychology is important because lead is the source of the transformation. Lead contains within itself its own fire, its own secret fire that will propel it into transformation. So lead, eventually, over time, through natural evolution, will transform. And the lead in us will also transform over time, whether we do anything about it or not. The whole process of alchemy is to speed up this process and put it under some kind of control. So lead is in us that lethargic, dead part, that part that makes you want to lay on the couch and watch TV, or that part that makes you depressed, that makes you feel dead, or that part that then when you're dying, when you become lead in the last stages of life. The promise of lead, the promise of Saturn, the promise of alchemy is that is an entryway, that deep darkness is a source of endless energy if you can tap into it. You take lead and pulverize it very, very fine in the laboratory, and it erupts into flames all by itself. It's very hard to do because it comes so easily, and you have to do it in the vacuum. But once you are able to pulverize lead, break it down, poof, all by itself, comes into fire, burns itself up. That's the secret fire of lead. Each one of us has that secret fire. And the process of alchemy is accessing that fire and releasing that fire to do its work. It's nothing we bring to ourselves. You have it, it's in your soul, it's in your leaden being, and it's there to access it if you know where to look and how to do it. And that's the process of alchemy on the personal level. So it's like the secret nuclear reactor that you can tap into. And often you do in life situations, that reservoir of unknown energy that comes from nowhere. That's coming from you and your own darkness and your own lead. So lead, although it's depression and sadness, it should never be denied. The alchemist would never take Prozac. The alchemist would never deny the darkness. The alchemist would go into a depression and work with that energy, assimilate that energy. It may be uncomfortable to the conscious mind, but the darkness is where the energy's at, and if you deny it, you're going to cut your source of transformation away. And this is why the alchemists got in trouble with the church, because the church, like many people, go towards the light. It's only about the light. And they're going to be doing good all their life, and they're going to be going towards the light. And as long as they do good, they don't care how many people they trample on in their lives. They don't care how many people they burn at the stake. They don't care how many people lives they destroy. And then going to the light. Well, it doesn't make sense, because the darkness is part of our lives. The darkness is part of our creation. It's part of our minds. It's part of our being. If we don't assimilate the darkness, and it can be scary, and it can be socially unacceptable, and it can be a lot of different things that are not in the general delusion. But the darkness is really where it's at. But you can't just go towards the darkness either. You have to have both. It's the Ouroboros. It's the whole process. If you deny the light, deny the dark, you're in big trouble. That's the balancing of these powers. It's not about good or bad. It's beyond that. It's about the assimilation of dark energy and light energy, consciousness and unconsciousness, showing the shadow that's within you and knowing what it is and giving it its right to be that way. The dragon of lead is associated with the chaotic powers of the prime matter, the first matter. And the idea is that erupting out of the Big Bang, of creation, erupting out of the chaos of the universe, the chaos of our own life situation, the chaos of our own minds, is the principle of a new energetic principle that carries with it this secret egg of being, egg of transformation. Inside this egg is the new man or the new self or silver. In alchemy, lead contains silver. That's something I want to talk about because many alchemists confuse the darkness of lead and the darkness of silver. But lead loves silver. But lead wants to become silver. And you can see it in the laboratory. Like I said, you cut lead and it looks like silver. The same process goes on with silver. In fact, when you smelt silver from its ore, the ore is blackened and destroyed, and the pure silver comes dripping out, and it's like the birth of a child, because that silver is alive, and that's what mercury is. In fact, it looks just like mercury. You can hardly tell the difference between a melted silver and mercury. And when silver is born from its ore, it's like a child, and it wants to breathe, and it has to breathe, and it jumps into the air, it leaps into the air, and tries to grab the air, or tries to breathe. You can see it in the smelting operation. And if it's allowed to continue, the silver becomes destroyed, basically. It dies, or the silver, and what's left is this hot surface of hardened metal that looks exactly like the surface of the moon, by the way. It has all these bubbles where it tried to grab the air. What the alchemists did, and part of that secret metallurgy tradition on how to smelt silver in Egypt, they balanced the silver with lead, and that's what you do in transmutation. You balance these different metals together so that they come together as nature intended them. So they add lead to the liquid silver coming out, and lead, because it loves silver, wants to unite with silver, wants to be silver over an evolutionary spectrum. The lead forms this blanket over the molten silver and protects it, and actually sacrifices itself for the silver. And you keep the process going, and the lead eventually, the volatile lead eventually actually evaporates until nothing's left but the pure survived silver, the living silver underneath. In fact, the metallurgists call it the silver peeking through the veil, because that's how the lead opens up in a little circle, and you see right there all this beautiful silver underneath this dark and black lead that's just evaporated. So that's how they smelt silver to this day, and it was an alchemist and the alchemy principles of alchemy who did this. Remember that lead and silver are related, that the noble metal of silver and lead have a lot in common. And it helps in the work, and it helps understand the processes here that we're going through. another another indication of a dragon here. And a lot of the dragons in alchemy, if they're shown in this kind of pose, especially red dragons, are symbols of calcination, which is how you overcome that and how you get beyond that. And I mean that on a personal level too. If you're in a lethargic situation or something where you can't come up with any creativity, if you lost the spark, if you're laying around, if you're depressed, fire is the answer. And the alchemists knew that, and that's what dragons like this mean. It's basically that you've got to have activity. You've got to just break it, because the longer you sit there, the deeper you're going to sink into the mud. The longer there's no activity, the more powerful the lead becomes. So you've got to do anything that has to do with fire. You know, I usually go jogging or something like that, but any kind of aerobic exercise, any kind of intense thinking, or just sitting there and if you're infirm or ill, just trying to do some type of, any type of movement really overcomes lead and brings us into the next stages. So fire is the solution to lead. Lead is the solution to the problems of silver. And a lot of the drawings of working with lead show dragons and struggling with dragons, because this first dragon of alchemy is the one that defeats us all. The larger process, the larger satanic process is through time burn us up. And that's what our lives are about. If we are not aware of alchemy, it's just a continuous burning and dissolving of everything we try to put together. Every piece of salt we build, every project we want to do, every book we want to write, we put out there in the stream of time, it's going to be calcinated. Simply because it's something to burn. It's something structured and something all real there. And lead goes through that process too. That's the beginning of the processes of transformation on the personal level too. We go through that in our psychology, in our bodies. Now the next step in this process, or transmutation, is into Saturn. And Saturn and Jupiter and Saturn have this relationship too. And then these first two processes, and you can see them on the tree of life, the first two steps at the tree of life, are related too. Saturn is this principle of contraction and death, and Jupiter is the balancing expansion and growth. In fact, the planet Jupiter is mostly gases. It's another planet that could have become a sun if it had drawn enough matter to it, but it's mostly gas now, and the Jupiterian person is mostly gas and air. In other words, there's not a lot of substance there. There's not a lot of what we call deep material. The transformation, the Jupiterian person, a jovial person, tends to be superficial, tends to be social, tends to engage in seductions and processes like just caring about money or just caring about material things, superficialness. And that's part of the metal for this planet. Tin. Tin is a superficial metal, although it too wants to become silver, wants to become noble. In fact, tin is very beautiful and actually very rare on the planet. But the tin in ourselves is like that. It's the thing we see in a person who we're attracted to and suddenly realize he's a big phony or she's a big phony. It's just the tin part, the tin man part that's out there, the cheap tin, which is not silver, but it looks like it and acts like it. Tin is like lead in a lot of ways, in that tin is the next step of evolution. Tin has the luster of lead without the darkness or the dull layer. And tin is also like lead, lasts for thousands of years. It's almost an indestructible metal. That's why it's used in tin cans. It doesn't get corrupted easily. Lead too, I mean, there's in Rome, there's still lead sewer pipes and water pipes that date back to Roman times. And there's been lead artifacts found that date back 7,000 BC that look like nothing's happened to them. They're immutable. So lead has a stubborn quality, and so does tin. The energies of tin, again, tend to be alluring and seductive. but not substantial. And tin is often shown as a struggle, but it's a higher level of struggle, where we're beginning to see the first step from Saturn to Jupiter is duality. In other words, we know that there's separate things in existence now to work with. We've been born out of death or reborn out of death. We are being reincarnated now, and we're realizing that there's more functions going on in the world. The operations of that involve solution and dissolution. Operations that take place on the psychological level, not with fire, aggressive fire, but more with water, watery operations. Like you dissolve that phoniness by deeper meditations, by getting in touch with yourself, or by being in relationships with people who just won't tolerate the bullshit anymore, and do you the favor of being honest with you, and letting you know that there's changes in you that have to be made. So the processes of dissolution are about taking down ego and reducing ego on a psychological level. A little bit different way than fire. It's not blowing you away, it's not destroying your life. It's just gradually melting you away and changing you in that way. And both these operations, dissolution and calcination, they go on for years and years to most people's lives, and that's where we're trapped in this. We build something up, we burn it down, we dissolve it, build it up, and whether it's ego or a business or a project, that's the operations that things go through. And if you don't get it out of that loop and move on to the next stages of creation and being, then it just dies of itself, or it becomes a stillbirth in chemical terms. Again, there's lots of images of dissolution, and all these refer to tin and Jupiter. So the next level here is iron and Mars. This is a transmutation from the shallowness of tin and the tin personality into the warrior type. In other words, you've got it together, now you want to go out in the world and assert yourself. The Mars person is very different from the Jupiter person. He's not he's not polite, he's not out to please anybody, he's there as himself, as a new ego, and he's going to assert himself and be solid. Mars people have depth, but they're rude. They tend to be thinking only of themselves and pushing themselves into the world, just like Mars does. Mars is the red planet, and red is the operative color here. Iron materials are used in warfare, and that's how the Iron Age came into being, with swords and weapons, and why the Iron Age started to express iron on our planet. And historically, and a lot of authors have written about this, like Toynbee, that the Iron Age was a blessing and a curse on us. Because if we don't leave the Iron Age, which is responsible for our warlike and violent society, culture we live in, and move on and transmute that as a planet, as a species, we're going to be destroyed. And the esoteric properties of iron are well known. If you work with iron long enough, you realize that this is a stubborn metal, a stubborn energy that can just defeat you, and can defeat your processes if it gets out of hand. And yet, if it's allowed to do its work, it actually brings you into existence. It's like a teenager, forming an ego, very rude, very aggressive, doing crazy things. If it goes too far, he's going to destroy himself. That's the Martian impulse being expressed in our personality, and that's about when it comes to birth in us. Iron itself, actually there's not much iron on the surface of the planet. A lot of it comes from meteorites. Most of the iron is at our core of the planet, which is unfortunate in an alchemical sense. In fact, there's many cultures around the world. The Cherokee, the Druids, a good example, the Druids knew the signatures of iron and forbid its use in their society. It could not be used, it could not be brought into their society. They hated iron, and because they knew the signature of war, violence, and disruption. and they didn't want it in their society. And the Cherokee too were very peaceful people and didn't allow iron, even when they could have made arrows and really advanced their culture to fit more in with the iron earth that we had, that we're stuck with. Iron, though, also has the promise of transmutation. Here is iron pyrite, which is fool's gold. So iron is necessary, but it's also a danger. Iron, if it's not transmuted at its proper stage, will destroy the whole process, will destroy the world, will destroy our planet if the iron archetype is not transmuted and moved on. And how do you transmute something globally? It's with the seeds of gold that we are all on this planet to become. It's by, we're the life force. We're the thing that transmutes. We're the mercury on the planet. We're the people and the animals and the life on this planet that can transmute the iron at our core. If we don't, it'll end. And it doesn't mean anything in the big scheme. I mean, there's always some species ready to take over and maybe do the alchemy a little better than we have. And like Carl Jung, I know was very unoptimistic about our planet and how it would end up because of this iron impulse in nature, in ourselves, and this violent, warlike thing that is expressed in every generation, and they think it's something new. It just goes on, and if we don't work with it, that dragon will destroy us. He's ready. But we need it. That is the impulse to exert ourselves in the world. So to become a warrior with the powers of iron, will work on any project, will work on any transmutation, unless it gets out of hand. A lot of the principles in alchemical drawings of iron show swords and splitting things open. The iron process is an air element process. It's about splitting things, breaking them up, and releasing their essence, the energy that the warrior is after to control, whether it be money or fame or power or politics or whatever. It's always about something hidden away that they want to achieve, and they don't care how they do it. More pictures of separation in the iron process. So if we can successfully transmute iron, and boy, I could go on about iron for a long time, but in iron there's what the alchemists call the brothers of iron. And it's like other metals that get together and form this horrendous band of marauders, marauder metals, I think we call them, that empower iron, the iron archetype, like for instance, cobalt, when you add it to iron, makes it a lot harder, and it gets beyond that brittle nature. And cobalt, actually the word comes from kobolds, which were little gnomes in mines that the alchemists felt, and miners felt were doing tricks on them and making the walls collapse and things like that. And another one is nickel, which is a watery element in mines. The word comes from nixies, which were little creatures in mines who caused flooding and water problems in mines. Iron only had one sister, and that was chromium, which is a beautiful, shiny metal that coats iron and makes it look like silver or an old metal. So all these relationships are going on with iron. It's very complicated. Iron's existence is very complicated now. The alchemists a lot of times didn't know how to work with iron, and they knew its importance, so they tried all kinds of compounds with iron. In fact, it was alchemists who learned how to put carbon or charred wood into molten iron to turn it into steel. And carbon is that black force that a lot of alchemists believe represented the first matter. So they actually sprinkled it into molten iron, and that process actually made steel. So the alchemists were the first people to make steel, which tames iron and makes it more useful and more balanced, because steel and stainless steel is more closer to silver, and the archetype is silver. Next planet, the next source is Venus, the copper metal. Venus is such a female power, even a planet Sometimes the planet is shown completely veiled, like a woman in a veil or a gown. And in fact, a lot of the drawings of alchemy show Venus wearing blue gown with a red dress underneath, which are the colors of copper when you put it in flame that come out. Here's an X-ray photo of Venus, and the surface is very much, it doesn't have that red color. That's only because of the infrared and X-ray film being used, but really the surface of Venus is extremely similar to the moon. It's all cratered and topped, and looks very similar to the moon, but you can't see it because it's veiled. It's hot, sultry, very humid, and 700-degree temperature all the time. Copper, though, itself is a beautiful metal, and it's in nature. It occurs in nature. It combines with hundreds of metals. Its favorite is iron. It's often found with iron. It's called the consort of iron, and it's the balancing of iron, the feminine. It's like this is the level of masculine and feminine energies coming together. It's the man and wife. It's the coming together and the balancing that occurs there. That's what tames the wild part of us. You know, Iron Man, that's the copper woman, and that's what brings it together, and that's the balancing that must occur socially for something productive to come. It doesn't necessarily mean a female and a male. It can be someone with a feminine nature with someone with a masculine nature, so we don't want to get stuck with stereotypes. It's hard enough working with archetypes. And in fact, this metal, combined with so many different other metals, that the alchemists called it the meretrix metallorum, the whore of the metals, and they had great respect for it, but they were a little suspicious of how promiscuous it was. But copper is really, because it combines and tames iron, is a symbol of conjunction, coming together of two things, just like the conjunction of male and female, bringing together at the marriage or the conjunction of powers. So a lot of times when you see dual dragons in a process, in a chemical process of flame, it's talking about copper and its compounds, or this marriage of opposites. A lot of times there's sexual imagery. In drawings of alchemy, this is it's really talking about tantric energies here, which were known to Western alchemists, and sexual alchemy was something that was practiced. This drawing shows the king and queen having been married and giving birth to a new child, which actually is a symbol of rebus, which is a two-headed thing, of the new thing that's born from them, the crude combination of the powers that come and are born. But it's also about sacrificing the sexual energy of the male, or the aggressive part, which is the taming of iron, and sacrificing that to the new birth, or to the young child there. Lots of sexual imagery when we're dealing with copper and the conjunction. Any drawings like this? Basically, this means on the personal level and in the laboratory, meditation-wise, coming together our feminine intuition and feminine ways of knowing with the rational and logical ways of masculine mind. And it also means on the higher level the coming together of the spiritual powers, the red powers of Mars with the white and more purified powers of copper, coming together in the above and giving birth to the new creature, which is a combination of both of them. On the planet, that means the coming together of spiritual and material, and coming together of masculine and feminine ways of knowing. That's how the iron's going to be conquered. That's how the iron's going to be raised, by just being spiritual, but by being out there spiritually and raising the whole vibration of the whole planet. And it will give birth to the new planet, the new social structure, the new man, the new human being in evolutionary alchemy. The next step here, transmutation. comes into mercury. Here's the symbol of copper. Really, it's an Egyptian Ankh, the life force. Mercury is the next stage here. And with mercury, we enter into the noble metals through a process called fermentation. Mercury is another planet. Here's another X-ray view of Mercury, which is the closest planet to the Sun, the fastest planet. It looks very much like the Moon, too. It's very cratery, very similar to the Moon. It reflects light like the Moon. The metal itself is unique, beautiful. And in fact, the alchemists thought that all metals were liquid at one time. So true, geology. But they respected mercury because it held on to its original innocence. It held on to its true nature, which is liquid. And it resists becoming salted or becoming a metal like lead or iron or tin. And it remained true to itself, to its true nature. Like some mercury people do who you know, people who have tremendous integrity about being true to themselves. Those are mercurial persons, and also it means people who can change their ego. Their ego is not salted, it changes. It becomes what's proper for the moment. They're not into defending ego, they're into becoming what's required in the moment. Like the ritual theater companies, for example. And Jeff Bryant, of course, is the perfect example of mercurial presences. In fact, in acting in the arts, there are many, many mercurial people. And when you find an actor, like many of you know, I worked with William Shatner in a movie called Mysteries of the Gods, and got to know him a little bit, and talked with him about this thing about mercury and actors. And he said that he becomes a character when he acts. He became Captain Kirk. And when he was acting, there was nobody else in his personality. It's almost like he becomes possessed by it. And that's what makes the best characterizations in actors. If actors are mercurial enough to become what they're portrayed, to sacrifice their own ego for the ego presence of the actor, that makes a very powerful performance. The problem with Bill is that when he wasn't an actor, he had this huge ego that he wanted to project and come into the world, although he's getting over that through an chemical process of really a mercurial process of making fun of himself, separating himself from that salted ego and making fun of himself, looking back and saying you're nothing. But his ego was so strong that he had to really come to terms with that, which was a lifelong process with him. This is cinnabar, sorry, not very clear, but cinnabar is the ore of mercury. It's very beautiful ore. It's usually in white quartz. The cinnabar is a red crystal that comes out of the ore. And if you actually heat this over an open fire, the mercury will come dripping out. But unlike silver, it doesn't go through this birth. It's just the same essence all the time, and it's not a violent birth like the birth of silver and smelting. Cinnabar is actually from a Persian word that means dragon's blood, and that's if any metal has dragons associated with it, it is mercury. Almost any depiction of a red dragon, especially something that has isolated scenes like mountaintops or deserts or things where it's a unique environment for itself, that's a symbol of mercury. The dragon of mercury dissolves us on a spiritual level, a deeper level. It dissolves salted things, ego, things that in the artistic process, like revising a book, that's mercury. We tear it down, or revising any creative project. We've been doing art of any type is about dissolving it through the process of mercury and revising it and bringing it together. It's not killing it. It's just dissolving it enough to recreate it on a new level. Whenever you see red and white, it usually means we're talking about a mercury dragon, because red and white are these last two stages of alchemy. It's a hint that we're going into the noble metals, the white symbolizing purification phase, the alchemical phase, And the red, of course, the legato phase, the final phase of coagulation. And taming this dragon is what the alchemist tries to do throughout all his operations. The birth that occurred in the conjunction, which and it could be an imaginary conflict, it could be a real child, it could be whatever comes between you and the union of your masculine and feminine sides, the irrational and the rational, the logical and the non-logical, intuitive. That those coming together is a difficult birth because you can't hold to that. It's much more easy to work whatever our nature is, like men to be logical and women to be illogical. Women to be intuitive. And if you can unite that and really listen to both those voices in your head, that's where the rebus comes through. Two heads, and boy do I feel like I have two heads sometimes when I'm in that state. And that's what the alchemists call the rebus, this creature that's created from the conjunction, just putting together. The idea is to take that union of intuition and logic on the personal level and make that a living presence into a stone. And that becomes a stone of Sophia, the stone in the philosophers, the philosopher's stone. This process of mercury involves fire operations and symbols like this. Anytime you see the creature is about this mercurial stage, the stage of fermentation where things are purposely destroyed, like a revision. And in fermentation, that's what happens. You take all the material and you bring it together in a digester or some type of place where it can rot. Sometimes they add a manure to the process to help get it along. The rotting and digestion was a very important phase. It was the revision, actually, phase of alchemy. And then out of that, of course, comes the fermentation where new life came in, and the alcohol of mercury was born. The spirits of alcohol and the spirit of mercury, bringing together these two opposing principles where if it's in a project, you want to have both the feeling in the project and the overall plot of the project, or the overall goal of the project, the overall structure of the project, but you never want to lose that part where there's an emotional attachment or feeling attachment. And believe me, people know that. When you write something that doesn't have both those things in it, people say it's dry or it's not there. Or you create something that doesn't have both these presences that appeal to us, because these are fundamental forces in nature. It really is. It's not just us, it's the whole universe that is a union of these forces, above and below. Here's Mercury being born from the meditation of the alchemist in Sora Mystica, which is also the male and the female consciousness, or the female and male ways of knowing, to bring this birth above in the spiritual realm of this empowerment of both of them. It results in a very fecundous and very fertile creature or product or whatever you've created. It's very fertile and it has a life of its own. So now the mercury is alive, and it's a living mercury. And in the lab we do that. We, just like the Van Houten showed us this morning, we animate the plant substance with mercury. We bring the salts back to life with the mercury principle. And that's what occurs in us. If we reach the conjunction and we just got this artificial thing, knowing that you should use logic and intuition or feeling and thoughts, knowing that you should do that, it doesn't come alive until that creature takes a life of its own, and all of a sudden you're being pulled along by it. It becomes bigger than your own ego. It becomes an overself that really takes over your life, and that's where the creativity comes from. That's where it's something separate. It's the conjunctive child. It's the child of the philosophers that is born, and it's very good. It's all mercury, and it can create wherever you apply it in your life. In the lab, it becomes the principle of transformation of the metals. This mercury, this level. About mercury, I'm sorry I'm going over a little bit, but I want to talk more personally about mercury because I don't think you're getting the whole picture here. The mercury is so unique is so powerful in our planet. It's our hope of transformation. And it's the metal, from the metal we can learn a lot. The metal itself also has this two-headed creature type feeling to it. In other words, there's a poison. Mercury is very poisonous. It has a poisonous compound like white mercury oxide is extremely poisonous. Just a teaspoon will destroy most of this hotel. But red mercury, like mercurochrome and products like that, are very healing. And taken internally, like in Rossiana alchemy in India, are healing drugs. If you use mercury to connect with these signatures, you realize that Mercury has this dual nature, but what determines it? Which way does Mercury go? And I'm convinced that it's our consciousness, which is also Mercury in light, this higher Mercury, that determines the nature of Mercury. Let me give you a personal example. When I was about 11 years old and lived in a tenement house in Chicago, they had this huge gas meter about this big in the basement, and the guy had come in and worked on it for some reason. Mercury is used for metering how much gas goes through the building. And there was a big pool of mercury on the floor, and as a kid, wow, what is this? It was really cool. I had no idea what it was, but I scooped it up and I got like a cup of it and played with it. I mean, I got to know it like the alchemist did. I flushed it around in my mouth. I loved the feeling of it under my tongue. I touched it bare hands. I ran it through my hands and squeezed it. You know what that is? And I wasn't afraid of it at all. And I didn't get poisoned. Well, as kids, I got a whole bunch of kids, like 12 kids, and we took dimes, which were silver back then, and silver coats, mercury coats silver bonds with it. We used this beautiful surface, this smooth, silvery surface. And our job was to take the silver dimes and dump them in mercury and make sure they were well coated with mercury and put them out into the world and repair these kinds. And God, we'd be terrorists today for doing something. I swear that's what we did. And all the handling of mercury for months and years, I don't think it got to me. I don't know. If anything, I think it really accelerated my brain. I don't know how crazy that is, but I got interested in mathematics and things like that at that time. And I don't know. I'm saying that if you approach mercury in a pure mind, in a pure state, or an innocent state, which the alchemists tell us you have to be purified before you get to this stage. You have to be white and pure and unfearful and no satanic energies in you. Mercury will not harm you. But today, as an adult, if I played with mercury in that way, well, I'd be dead in a few days. I don't think an adult, as an adulterated creature, can handle mercury in that way. But I don't know. That's a very true story. And mercury has an affinity for the body that's amazing. It has an affinity for the brain. Mercury, when it enters the body, goes right through the system, the lymph, and actually travels along the nerves to the brain. It's right for the brain. And it causes then, depending on the state of consciousness, I guess, either causes retardation or maybe not even awareness. I don't know. God, I am not advocating taking mercury, so let's not be crazy, but that's just a true story. In fact, there was an alchemist in England who used to demonstrate how fast the affinity of mercury for gold. He used to put a gold coin in his mouth, take his big toe and put it in a saucer of mercury, and then in about 20 minutes, the gold coin would be coated with mercury. That's how fast mercury hits for the head. And of course, he didn't do that too many times. Okay, let's move along here. So, the next stage is silver, and mercury is considered silver, quicksilver, living silver. And silver itself is this other type of darkness I was talking about, the unconscious mind. It's still in the light, it's still mind, but it's the unconscious mind. And the correspondence or characteristics of the moon are reflected light, and that's how the subconscious is. It's reflected light, but it takes in the light. So you've got like two consciousnesses going on. If you don't know it, you're going to get in trouble eventually with conflicts between these two levels of consciousness, the subconscious, the unconscious, and the conscious mind. They're going to start tripping each other out. That's why it's so important to bring these together somehow, to integrate the shadow. But I'm sure you all know about that with Jung's work. The moon changes, he goes through stages, it's very ephemeral. And that's what happens with the subconscious energies. They take on, they're a reflection of the conscious energies, the shadow of the conscious energies that can change and take on a life of their own. But it's an ephemeral life, but also a dangerous life. Silver as a metal carries its life force, it grows. Silver crystals will grow just like a plant. Silver has this, just like when it's born, just like an animal, and it's just like it has to breathe when it's born in the smoking process, and it grows in its crystal form just like a plant. The dragon of silver is a cool dragon, cool energies emerging in the moonlight. Any types of dragons that you see in alchemy like this represent silver, the processes of silver. This is a distillation process, which is how you how you assimilate the silver energies or the subconscious mind to really the process of analysis is just a distillation. It's going down and up, bringing things up from the unconscious and the darkness into the light. And if you can't do it yourself, and you have a proper therapist who can do it with you, that's the work. That's the work of distillation. That is psychological integration. That's bringing together these unconscious and conscious powers and making them powered into a new stone or a new integration of personality. This is another symbol of distillation. The ego in alchemy means distillation. And this is the process of taking that rebus or the mercurial creature through the distillation process, unconscious and conscious, feminine and masculine ways of moving up. And it goes through life like this. This is how your life goes until you integrate these two on its own or with help. And it goes many, many times like this pile of dead eagles shows here. This process of distillation goes on through our life, and that's what the universe goes through, really. A distillation that eventually unites these totally opposite energies. Symbols of the queen are symbols of alchemy, of that union. And the final process here is gold. Gold. Here I am telling other speakers to cut it short. Gold in the sun. We just got 5 more minutes here. The sun is this pure solar energy that burns everything away. And gold is just like that. Gold doesn't want to be around any other metals except silver and mercury. That's the only two it combines with and makes alloys. But gold is very aloof. Has nothing to do with other metals. Gold, though, has this signature of, I don't know, as soon as you see gold, you know what I mean. In fact, when I went to New York once, I was editing some journals and magazines, got so fed up with the idiot publishing empire in New York that I had to retreat. I went to the Nevada desert up here by Silver Spring, got a little trailer all by myself in the middle of the desert. And I had so many books that the trailer was like this, and I was sleeping with my head and everything like that. And eventually I got tired of that hermit existence and needed money, and there was a gold mine nearby. Anyway, I worked in the maintenance crew for a while. And one day I got to go down in the mine, which was like 1,800 feet down. And I got to see what they call the face. And it was an experience I'll never forget. I was interested in alchemy at the time. I knew what it meant, but I never knew what gold was until I saw it there, underground, in the darkness. Anyway, the face was a room that they were working on at the time. They took out $2 million a month of gold out of that mine. A helicopter would fly in and take it away. Anyway, I walked into this room, and there's a wall of quartz, white quartz. And right in the middle, there's this 1.5-foot vein of pure gold. And it was amazing. Here it is underground, and gold likes quartz. Gold likes white quartz for some reason. So that's an indicator when you're mining to look for it. But you have this 12-inch to 8-inch vein of gold just heading up to the light, underground, straight as an arrow. It's like somebody painted it there. And here it was, it felt so alive and it felt so archetypal that I've never forgot that experience. Oh, here I am, detour. Wouldn't that be cool? That feels better than mercury. And usually a dragon's shown with a ball or a pearl or holding something like that is this stage of coagulation, the final operation in alchemy. And actually the key here at this final stage is that there's really nothing to do. If you've done all the work of the previous operations, the coagulation occurs by itself. It just materializes from the previous work. Eventually you'll be doing a distillation in the lab too, where you'll know that this is over, that this process is done, and you're incarnated at a whole new level. It's a whole new note on the scale. You've gone through these 7 operations, and now you're at that 8th new octave as a first note, but at a higher vibration. That's us, that's the planet, that's the metals, that's the plants. That's this hidden process of transmutation that's going on in the world. Thank you.